Welcome to the Behaviorist with Work Wisdom, where we help you adopt high-performance mindsets, behaviors, communication, and culture. I am your host, Dylan Ehlert. Our intention for the Behaviorist podcast is to share accessible, concrete practices that you can weave into your whole life to begin a shift towards joy and meaningful achievement. Today, we're going to explore how to minimize loss aversion so that we can make bolder decisions that help us build the lives, communities, and organizations we want, rather than simply protect us from the loss, embarrassment, or failure. My guest today is Joey McMonagle, Chief Business Development Officer at Atomic Design and frequent Behaviorist guest. Joey, do you want to kind of give us a little bit of an overview on what loss aversion is and how it shows up in our lives?
Sure. So first, I think it's important to notice that loss aversion is a bias. Just like any of the frameworks and sort of mental constructs that we bring to the table, it's a way that we look at the world, like a filter that we have on our perspective. And it is a way for us, as you mentioned, to minimize negative outcomes, right? We're going to stay away from the scary things.
Yep.
And it seems like it comes from this sort of prehistoric wiring in our brain. So when we were still, hunting and gathering, perhaps there's a rustle in the leaves over there and the trees over there. That could either be a tiger that wants to eat us, or it could be a deer or something that we want to eat.
Yeah.
Now, the upside of it being a deer is not as big as the downside if it's a tiger. So I think we learned how to develop that response, that threat assessment that would say, stay away from the uncertain because it could be scarier than it could be good.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we have that part of our brain, the amygdala in our brain that floods us with adrenaline when there's uncertain things.
Yes.
And we still use that in a way, like this old software in this new context where we're not making life and death decisions. We're just going through our lives, perhaps considering a move at work or in our personal lives to buy something, to move somewhere, to try something new food, whatever.
Yeah.
And that part of our brain kicks on, floods us with adrenaline, and brings us back to that life and death decision experience inside, even though it's not really related.
Yeah.
So loss aversion is this way that we bring that sort of historic and well-developed skill into places where we don't need it anymore.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And I also think when I think about loss aversion, there's a cousin to loss aversion too, which is, something along the lines of, there's that kind of loss aversion we feel when we have to make a decision in the moment, but there's also sort of a premeditated loss aversion that we bring when we think about how to make decisions in our lives. So, give an example if you can. Yeah. So it could be something like, you're thinking about, you and your family uprooting and you're going to go, I don't know, live in the woods and,
Sounds
farm
good.
and, do something crazy, and a lot of times what our brain's thinking about when we're thinking about this is like, so if I leave, how hard is it for me to get my job back? How much money do I have to survive? What happens if we don't know how to farm? The whole kind of litany of things that are the kind of the downside of that. And we fail to think about the potential of sort of the joy that our life could have in that moment. So, that's also that is literally what loss aversion is, but it's sort of this bias before we even make a decision. We tend to discount. We're not fearful of, we don't have the fear about saying like, oh crap, so we don't make, let me back up. So we don't make that decision, right? We don't move to the woods and, grow our own food and, live off the land and live this idyllic life. And we decide to kind of stay put.
Yeah.
And then 10, 15, 20 years down the line, we continue on with the life we're living. And the fear and at that point we might say, oh golly, is this what I wanted from life?
So the opportunity cost of not making the decision.
The biggest opportunity cost.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And we tend not to have that fear. We can't really sort of conceptualize the pain of not building the life that we want. The future pain.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
So,
deferred pain versus deferred gratification. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's weird. There's like that asymmetrical emotional response is the way I've heard it described. Like as we talked about earlier, the fear of losing $100 is way in a bigger scale than the joy of earning $100.
Yep.
So you're way more likely to make a decision to avoid that loss than to go for the move that might get you the same amount as a gain.
Yep.
Strange, but real.
It is. And there's certain people too, when they talk about loss aversion, talk about the danger of being too conservative too. So you can think about this in in an organizational context. You may, let's say you're a small business and you need to, I run a painting business. You're a small business and you need to reinvest. We need to buy $100,000 of equipment in order to grow our next, whatever, $1 million or something. Right.
Sure.
And, a lot of times, when we, make those decisions and we kind of bring this bias of like, wow, I'm much more afraid of losing $100,000 than I am of making, that $500,000, that $1 million. I can't, when I'm feeling that decision, I'm in my amygdala.
Yeah.
I'm thinking through that place of fear.
Totally.
And sort of that conservatism, though, can bring us to a bad spot because I might not make that investment. Maybe my competitors do.
Yeah.
Maybe they sort of outcompete me slowly over time. And that decision to not take that risk actually in the long term ends up harming me.
Totally.
So
isn't it wild? So like there's been research done on the way that negative emotional experiences or feedback stay with us in a way that positive ones don't.
Ooh.
Right? Like,
Yes.
You think about that one bad email that you got today or whatever day, that sticks with you all day long. That one harsh comment from your partner.
Yeah.
You ignore all the positives, all the compliments, all the gratitude that was shared with you, and that negative stuff sticks with us.
Yeah, and this is where a lot of stuff we try to do at Work Wisdom comes into play, right?
Yeah.
And you can kind of see how these fit together. Like part of sort of minimizing loss aversion is probably getting better at thinking positively about future outcomes, positive visualization, just trying to bring that sort of enthusiasm to the way that we're thinking and counteracting sort of some of those negative automatic responses, right? It's kind of the same function. So
yeah, it seems like we have that sort of default setting. It's going to lead us towards the negative, the fear. From an evolutionary perspective seems valid, but now maybe not so helpful. So we have to be intentional about what we're projecting, what we're imagining, and what we're willing to chase for different outcomes.
Yeah, so that kind of leads me to my next thing that I think about with this is like, why do we need to minimize loss aversion though? So the reason I think about this is there's a lot of things, this wiring is in us for rational reasons to some degree. So, I guess I'm just trying to think through, like, how do we think about striking a balance between this?
Right, because just trying everything and anything, we'd all be dead by now.
Sure.
If we ate every plant that we saw.
Yep.
So I think for one reason we need to rethink this and address it is that wiring in us is sort of outdated. It's like old software trying to solve new problems.
Yep.
We're not making life and death decisions often. And so when we bring that kind of stress and mental load to a decision that doesn't need it, it's inappropriate and we're going to be weighted towards that negative outcome. And as you've described, not making the choice really limits the upside, the potential outcomes. And it starts to stray into this place where we start to believe that we're limited by what we already have control over. When we are afraid to take the step into the uncertain space or try the new thing, we put limits around ourselves that keep us stuck where we are. And then the opportunities for growth really don't exist. We're going to just stay in our safe little comfort zone and, comfort zone will kill you or something like that. At least not let you grow.
Yeah, I think the point you make there is really good and something that's easier said than done, which is to make sure we understand the level of risk.
True. Yeah.
When trying to find balance between sort of using some of this internal sort of loss averse wisdom, for lack of a better term. I mean, it's there for a reason. It does protect us, but making sure that we're not overusing that. So, I mean, to your point, when we're thinking about, oh gosh, should we buy this $100,000 piece of equipment? This is not there's not catastrophic outcomes that are associated with this, right?
Totally.
So if we're making a decision to, I guess, upend our family and go live in the woods and farm, that maybe we should actually be, our amygdala should be a little stoked. That might be a pretty big decision, but not all decisions are like that, and it's really critical to remember that for sure.
Yeah, and I think the degree to which we acknowledge that our amygdala is going to kick in and we're going to be flooded with adrenaline, we can then let that moment pass and then start to use our prefrontal cortex, which is where rational thought actually happens, and doesn't get co-opted by all the fear. So unless we're really being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, then we probably don't want our amygdala making our decisions for us, or the relative version of that from current times.
Well, I guess minimizing that automatic response function is probably a whole other podcast. So, what are some ways you work in your life to minimize loss aversion?
So one of the sort of sneaky underbellies of this loss aversion, I think, is the way that, so again, thinking about prehistoric times, there was a strong correlation between your ability to threat assess and your survival and your existence. And so now that we don't need that, because I'm not literally being chased by predators, generally speaking, I need to separate my performance, whether this is at work or at home or in any environment, from my sort of ability to exist. And inherent in that ability to exist, I think, is some notion of identity. And so many of us conflate our work performance and our identity, and we become the worker. Or so that means, like, when you give me feedback about my decision making or my performance, you're now attacking my identity and my very sort of core value. I think that's a dangerous place. That's fear inducing. That's amygdala triggering. That's not a place where we can really grow and thrive. And if I'm able to separate those things and understand that the decision I'm about to make, whether it's $100,000 for a potential return of $1 million, or if I should try to make the souffle pancakes that my daughter really wanted me to make this morning for breakfast, even though I don't know how to make a meringue and I've never tried it before, like those are, very different circumstances, and I don't have to bring all that fear. I'm not going to be actually worth less as a human being if I fail at those things. I'm still going to be whole. There's a quote by this Irish philosopher and poet named John O'Donohue, who I learned about through Work Wisdom, Kedron. And he's got this quote that your identity is not your biography. And I think it's such a challenging thing for us to consider in this day and age. But I think it's so true. And to the degree that we can acknowledge that and allow those things to separate, then we can be creative in trying new things, not fearing the loss of those decisions and trying them anyway, because we know that over here, we're okay. We're a whole human. We are cared for. We're fine. Our existence is not threatened by the outcome of this decision. Yeah,
it's beautifully put. And I started thinking about this a lot. It was around the time my son was born, and I was just kind of reading some things, and this came up. And the book I was reading, we did a previous podcast on anti-fragility. One of the key critiques, there's many critiques, but one of the key critiques in that book was along this lines that, the modern world and the professionals that populate sort of the way the world's run, the people that run the world typically tend to be the people that have their identity sort of interlocked with their work so deeply. And this is a structural issue in the world, in the sense that, we're kind of run by a bunch of people that don't want to lose their jobs more than they want to do something bold. And this is a fundamental challenge. I don't know how to do it myself. So
one day at a time, right?
Different pod if somebody has that, that feedback. But, it's hard because, for so many of us that work so hard, it's hard to you do become lost. I mean, there's times for me where I've been, the sole focus of my life has been work out of necessity sometimes. You're in that grind, you're in that sprint. You're growing, there's an issue at work, whatever the case may be, and you almost have to be absorbed into it. And finding that true balance of being able to, it's this funny paradox, because in order to build something great, you need to put everything into it. So how do we find that balance between putting ourselves into something 100%, 100,000% in order to build something great and lasting and meaningful, while also being able to say, that's not who I am?
Well, I think you just said it, though. By putting yourself into something like that, you're not being loss averse, right? You're actually going all in, sliding all the chips into the center, and willing to risk it all. And I think that comes from, I presume, from the ability to know what it is that drives you. Like, what do I care about?
Right.
If you're doing this for yourself and you're doing it because you need to survive, like literally, or
Right.
or if you're doing it because it's the passion that you have and the the thing that's driving you professionally and creatively, then I think you're able to make a decision to go all in, and then that loss aversion kind of fades. I think one of the challenges for us in this culture and society is that we don't often know what drives us. We don't know our values. We don't know what really like lights us on fire, and we find ourselves doing things that don't connect with those parts of us.
Right.
And then it's a lot easier just to kind of stay in the flow, stay in the middle, not be bold, not to make that leap, that go all in on something and try something new.
Yeah.
So intrinsic versus sort of extrinsic motivation, I guess, is what I'm slowly getting towards. Like, you know, as a parent, we think about, we talk to our kids when they bring home a piece of artwork. The temptation is to be like, "You're amazing. This is amazing." And, you know, as I've been learning, I can say things like, "Wow, this is really cool. What made you decide to pick these colors?" Or "How did you feel when you painted this?" As opposed to lauding them with praise, because that praise then starts to replace their own sort of intrinsic desire to do things. And they start to think, well, if I do this, then I get that feedback, and that feedback is why I'm doing it, instead of because of my own desire to make a cool thing. Yeah. Right. So, and as grown-ups, I can speak for myself as a grown-up with a history of people pleasing in my background. Sure. You know, I'm learning still how to replace that extrinsic motivation with intrinsic motivation. Yes. So I do it for me, and not because I'm afraid of not getting feedback. Yeah. That's a whole different game, right? Yeah, it's kind of a little tangent on that. You know, in one of the source materials that kind of inspired all of this, it's an essay by Alain de Botton. I don't know how to say his name, from the School of Life. It's called it's an essay called On Confidence. And he talks about something related to this, and his whole thing is about how we all tend to internalize criticism too deeply, partially because as children we're taught that external authority is what validates the decision we make. So, you know, our parents, when we grow up, they say, you know, if somebody's in trouble with the police, they're likely guilty. If you know, if a movie comes out and, you know, your parents read a review on it and it's bad, you know, it's probably bad. And so to the greatest degree, and it's interesting for me because it's kind of helped me to think differently about this topic, where, you know, I think for a while I thought, you know, I was kind of brought up in a similar way where I was always getting that sort of positive feedback, and my intrinsic motivation was always brought on by sort of external positive feedback, right? And it's kind of a vicious cycle. And you know, I think what I realized is not that, you know, it's funny, like at some points I was like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that, you know, when we're children, or when I was a child, I think in retrospect what I realized is that my parents' love for me was unconditional, but their feedback and their love on some level was conditioned by others. So the results that I brought about in the world kind of told me sort of who I was, and it was all sort of externally, you know, fed. And so finding that sort of internal voice and that ability to be unfit, and this is why it's in this essay on confidence. True confidence is when we can kind of look at a critic, look at a boss, look at, you know, all the detractors when you're trying to start a business, and saying, I know what you're all saying about this being wrong, but I can believe in myself. So, I think that you said it earlier in that sentence there, or in that part there, taking the criticism so deeply. That's like when we think our identity is on review, or up for review, or our worth is up for review, when we have a job review, or a postmortem on a gig or something like that. That's a dangerous place. You know, all of a sudden criticism or negative feedback is like an indictment, right? And, you know, that's a thing we have to learn skillfully to not take it that way. And I think that's all tied to the loss aversion thing, is it's coming from a place of fear. Yeah. So true intrinsic motivation, and sort of a true deep sense of self and confidence in oneself definitely helps us to become less loss averse. What about kind of a related sort of topic, which has come up kind of in some of my reading on this, is spirituality. So part of, you know, this podcast initially was going to be on confidence and community, and the reason that sprung up is I was talking in the HBR review with somebody, and I was just kind of talking about how, you know, I see a lot of people of faith
especially in the local business community around here, but sort of broadly in a lot of networks that I'm in, particularly in contracting.
Mm-hmm.
They're people of faith. The owners are people of faith. And you can see very clearly that a lot of that comes from they've right-sized what life is. I don't know how to put that, but, this isn't the end here. This isn't the end goal. And they also have kind of a backstop of having that faith of saying, hey, I'm going to be able to take this step, which is bold, is crazy. I'm going to get over my loss aversion because what is there to lose? Like the only stakes are, if I make it, if I make it to heaven or
whatever.
Yeah.
Sure,
and,
sure.
That's kind of partially where kind of this started. Cause I do think that spiritual freedom plays a big part in us being loss averse. I mean, similarly, folks that, may have a Buddha, like sort of non-attachment in Buddhism can also give us loss aversion. If we believe, intrinsically of, I don't know.
It can relieve us from that loss aversion.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so I don't know. How does spirituality sort of make us more loss averse, or can it?
I think it makes sense because I think mature religion is teaching us that there's more to us than the material world, than our success here on this planet, right? And that is similar to what we were talking about earlier about separating your identity from your performance. And I think that a lot of religious views would share that there's more to you than the way you're doing your job or the way you're making money or whatever that is.
Sure.
And the idea of, in general, sometimes at least, good or mature religions foster community.
Yes.
And in community, you have connection to other humans who love you, who care for you, who show up for you in your life, regardless of your performance on that day's work or last week's project, or your without looking at your tax return, whatever, So you have people who are reminding you that there's more to you than the way you aced that test or didn't, close the deal or didn't, all those things. So just expanding us and our identity, our sense of identity beyond our work, I think is a huge part of that, and supports that resistance, that ability to defend ourselves from that loss aversion, which is baked into our DNA.
Yeah, and this is kind of what sort of initially inspired this, because somebody in the HBR review kind of said the same thing. It was like, for me, you can't have faith without community. And I think, for me in my own personal experience in different walks of life, I've been sober for quite some time. And one thing I realized in my sobriety was that, in retrospect, I didn't know this in the moment, but it was not just the sort of actions I took in my sobriety that, were kind of laid out by counselors, other people that are helping me in my sobriety, so on and so forth. It wasn't just those actions that I took to make positive psychological change kind of personally. It was that community that really gave me purpose, feeling, acceptance, etc. And it's hard to find that in the modern world. I think this is kind of one of the things that, I think we're all struggling with. It's an epidemic. I mean, frankly, since we have become less religious, we don't have these sort of preordained institutions that form a community for us in the same way.
Absolutely.
And so we're all kind of struggling to find that. So I mean, I think to the great degree that you can find community in your life, I think you can be loss averse. And I do think that for sure some of the people that I see that are just risk takers and people are trying to build something in the world, they do have that backstop. They have that soft place to fall to, which is that love that you get in a community where the love is truly unconditional.
That's so real. Similarly, as a person in recovery and familiar with the recovery world, you see a lot of folks in that world who have not been able to distinguish their performance from their sense of self.
Sure.
Right? And so the pain and loss that comes with getting that wrong can end up taking down a road that hopefully leads you to recovery. And so, there's a saying in that world that, we, meaning the community, will love you until you can learn to love yourself. And like that kind of support from a community, that's the kind of thing that can help you really realize that it's not about the way you're measured externally, that there's more to it. And I think that is like at the core of how we get past this loss aversion. A deep sense of self-awareness and awareness of who you are and what isn't you, you know?
That's really powerful. One thing I think about on this front, as it relates to kind of running an organization, we both work for-profit organizations.
Yeah.
How do we bring some of this to work? Like it's such a crazy, difficult context to find, because if we're sitting here saying like, hey, if we're creating space for people to feel, again, so one issue that many organizations have is that we end up becoming overpopulated with people that are loss averse.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that's necessary. I talked about this a lot in different contexts on this pod. Like some of your organization needs to be a little nervous. There needs to be some people trying to keep the trains running on time.
Sure.
But if this becomes sort of, if this type of, person becomes overpopulated in your organization, or you become stagnant.
Sure.
So how do we create organizations that, we can't love people unconditionally at work? There's always a condition, but how do we bring this into our organizations?
Well, so actually, I think we can.
Okay.
And I think that does not mean that we permit everything, right? Loving someone is not permitting them to do whatever they want. So there's a phrase I hear a lot at Work Wisdom, which is unconditional positive regard.
Yeah.
So like in a positive organizational approach, if I'm talking to my employees with unconditional positive regard, I can address their behavior in a moment, give them feedback about a thing that they're not doing well and really need work on, without communicating to them that I don't think that they're doing their best, or that they're worth the effort or worth the feedback.
Right.
So there's a tension between those things, and it takes a lot of skill to do that. But I think that's one of the big missing points, is that we give feedback in a way that people are allowed to take it as, people can take things as ever they will, but when we are not careful, we can mix up our messaging and allow people to hear what we're saying is that you are bad and you failed.
Right.
Instead of, you just got some incredible data about a way not to do it. And I think it's incumbent on us as leaders to make sure we're delivering that unconditional positive regard and really clear, direct feedback in the moment about behaviors, not about personality, not about anything that's not the behavior that we want to address.
Sure.
And that allows us to coach people into knowing that they're secure in their role, safe in their role, don't have to pretend anything. Let's be honest about what's working, what's not working. When do I need help? Now, I can ask for help if I know that my boss is going to hear that as a sign of confidence and not as a sign of weakness.
Yep.
Yeah,
one thing I think about, I want to ask you about this, is how do we think about kind of bringing growth mindset to our organization as well, because that seems to address some of this bias a little bit. So talk to me about growth mindset and loss aversion.
Well, so I think growth mindset is really about that intrinsic motivation again, right? If I'm willing to consider a circumstance and a situation and all of its parameters, all of the realities of it, whether that's what you might call critical feedback or negative feedback, which is just feedback that I'm taking personally. But if I can hear all that as pieces of the puzzle that I didn't have yet, then all of a sudden that's like emboldening me and empowering me. And I'm not scared to try something new because I'm afraid, because I'm worried about getting feedback that it didn't work. I'm actually empowered and emboldened to do that because I know I'm going to find out something. I'm going to get some data back, either approval and confirmation that my idea was right because it worked, or pieces of feedback that it didn't work, and here's how it didn't work, and here's why it didn't work. So my next attempt is going to be different and informed by those decisions, by those pieces of feedback. So again, when we think that our amount of knowledge and that our abilities are capped and limited, that's the fixed mindset, the antithesis to the growth mindset. Then any negative feedback or any evidence that our idea wasn't perfect is really dangerous and scary and confirming that we don't know what we're doing. Yep. But when we can flip that around, then I think we have the chance to grow and thrive and be creative and try things. And as you said, the stagnation risk is huge when we're all sitting around not willing to step out and try something new. We're not going to grow, and that is not the kind of business environment that we're looking to foster at our organizations.
Yeah, it's really tough because again, I think the thing that is tough about this is I think when I talk with folks that I work with, I do like the sort of old saying that kind of goes around here a lot and is said a lot often is sometimes I win, sometimes I learn, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we try to employ that at work. It's hard though, it's really, really difficult because again, we're trying to kind of beat down that amygdala. We're trying to beat down that long-term wiring. And yeah, like we're all wired that way. Right. And so we're not, it's not that we're trying to consciously sort of unwire ourselves in that way. And it takes constant feedback. It's not just something you can put up on the wall and walk away. It's not something that you can just do in sort of a monthly one-on-one or
No.
It takes constant sort of feedback. And it's also difficult too, finding that sort of line between holding people accountable to the results that you expect, but also being like, hey, sometimes we win, sometimes we learn. And it's
Absolutely.
just like,
That's that tension, right?
how do we find that line? All of the answers to things are hard because it lies in us trying to synthesize two strongly competing impulses, right? Again, in that example, we're sitting down at a review. We have an organizational culture that is sometimes we win, sometimes we learn, but we also have revenue targets we need to hit,
Sure,
or sales targets, or customer performance, or net promoter score,
Sure.
all of it, and we have all these data points that we need to get to. And so it's hard to kind of, as a leader, bring that balance of not being a little frustrated sometimes,
I can imagine that.
and knowing where learning, what is the acceptable timeline for learning too.
Well, that's a individual reality. But you hit the nail on the head earlier when you said it's not at every quarterly review, right?
Right.
It's daily. It's project to project. It's moment to moment. That feedback has to be a part of the culture. Or it doesn't have to be, but it can be part of the culture, so that people are always learning, and not just when their profitability report or their sales goals are below quota. If you're only talking about performance when there's negative performance, then you're sending a pretty clear message about what you care about, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the challenges to us as leaders. And there's evidence out there about the ratio of positive feedback to critical feedback to help someone grow. And we are, as we already discussed, we have this preconditioning towards sticking on and holding on to the bad. Yeah. So I mean, that's again where as leaders we have to make sure we're balancing our feedback and our and the insights we're sharing, so our teammates can learn. And we also have to be realistic and honest. And again, if that's part of our culture to tell the truth and always be trust that the truth is always the kindest answer, then when something's not working out and somebody's not picking it up after considerable investment, then it's not a surprise, and there's no one should be terribly disappointed by the fact that we have to make a change, because we've tried it. We've been honest about the gap between performance and expectations. We've been honest about that for a period of time. You've acknowledged it. I've acknowledged it. Like, hey, we're still here talking about this. That's a different place to be, I think. Right.
Cool. You think we missed anything at all?
No. I mean, we talked about loss aversion, the ways that we can combat it, the ways that we can acknowledge that it's part of our DNA, and we have an opportunity to sort of work ourselves around it, rewire, employ new software.
Yeah. So one thing I would put out there, it's kind of the boring part of it. I talked about this a bit when we did the anti-fragility podcast, but we talked a lot about the sort of non-material ways to address loss aversion. One of the material ways, though, that again came out of that book, Anti-Fragility, and really kind of the source text talks a lot about sort of becoming sort of more or less like doing what your dad says, which is like saving money and reinvesting it. One way, and it's easier said than done. We all have different means.
Sure.
We all have different responsibilities and obligations financially. But one way to minimize our personal loss aversion and how we interact with the world is to try to save money, try to reinvest, and try to get a little bit more financial freedom. Because yes, a lot of these sort of community, trying to find a deeper and truer sense of identity, maybe some type of spiritual belief system, all these things can make us less loss averse. But, sometimes we do come back to sort of true blue, if we want to talk about, going back to the caves,
Mm-hmm.
we are also wired to make sure that we're providing, we have the material resources that we need.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think to the greatest degree possible, if you care about being bolder and you're somebody like me who's not, my amygdala is pretty big. I'm not, some people think I'm bold. I'm not really the boldest person though.
Sure.
So if you're somebody that's not, naturally bold, confident, risk taking, but you want to do a little bit more, getting those material resources and having like a bit of a backstop there to give you a little bit more latitude with how you go about sort of, taking action in life will help. So.
Yeah, I could see that. So there's a relationship there too between having some sort of reserve and also having, what's your relationship to that?
Yeah.
You know, like how much is enough?
Yeah.
Which I think is a whole, probably another podcast, but making sure that when you're defining what's a safe place to launch from, you're reality checking that.
Yep.
And that's where, again, the growth mindset comes in, asking other people for feedback and then listening to that feedback, not taking it as an indictment of your character, but as real evidence that other people have from other people's experience about what is enough, what's not enough, what are the risks, what are the opportunities, building on your community and your connection there. I think all of that ties together.
Yeah, no, it's a great point because, we all need something. And even, I was thinking about it on the drive over. I was like, let me try to think through folks that literally need no material to live. Like you think about maybe like a monk, they even have to live in a monastery, right? Sure. Like somebody needs to feed them day in and day out. And it's funny, even down to that example, like even that person may be biased in terms of how bold or not bold or sort of conformist or non-conformist they're going to be.
We all are.
Yeah.
The biases are everywhere.
And it's funny. I was trying to like think, but yeah, even a monk living in a monastery up in the hills, they still probably are going to kind of toe the party line a little bit.
Yeah.
They may not take the risk that they need to grow spiritually or to make the world a better place or whatever the case may be, because somebody has to feed them. They want to be sheltered. Where are they going to go if they don't? How are we going to, if I get kicked out of this monastery, where am I going to get money, so on and so forth? So
it's all relative, right? The comfort zone is the thing we're talking about. Yeah. That is the thing that's going to limit you. If you're happy to stay in your comfort zone and never take that bold step, whatever your comfort zone is, as a monk living with very meager means, or living a very lavish lifestyle, if you're an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, it doesn't matter, where you are. It's just your relative relationship with your means.
Yeah. No, and again, I think one thing I think about with this, I'm trying to work on myself since I read this when my kid was born, and he talks about this a lot in Anti-Fragility, but is trying to, again, also sort of old boring dad wisdom of trying to live below your means.
Sure.
And trying to the greatest degree possible to not need material, because that is going to ultimately be the thing, regardless of what the outcomes are, that are going to allow you to live boldly. Because you could save some money, reinvestment. Those investments may go poorly.
Sure
you may have a bunch of money saved away, and then inflation goes up 100%, and your money doesn't bring you as much. And the true backstop to allow us to always have true freedom is not needing as much to live, and not having that dependency. And that lack of dependency, it brings, you can have more sort of a stronger sense of self, because you may sort of have an identity that's detached from your work, but if your material well-being is still attached to what you're doing, you are still probably locked into being a little bit more loss averse than you truly want.
For me, I think that the loss aversion, the key of it comes down to what's your relationship with uncertainty. Because the fact, at least in my experience, the world is uncertain.
Sure.
Things are dynamic. Nothing is permanent. And so whether that's money or your identity or your sense of status, if you're locked in any of those things staying exactly as you have crafted them to be, then I think you're going to have some loss aversion, because you're going to be interested in maintaining instead of willing to risk.
Yeah.
And as you talked about means, the less means you have sometimes inspires bolder action.
Sure.
Desperation has been an incredible springboard for lots of things.
100%.
So it's all about your relationship with those things. I think. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I think we kind of hit a lot of it. And again, I hope folks take away from this. And again, it's for me a personal exercise. Like I said, I'm not the boldest of person. So this exercise of trying to figure out what are the things I can do? How can I construct my life in a way that allows me to be bolder, right? Like how can I be structurally bolder through the decisions I make? Yeah. And I think all the things we discussed today can help us be a little bit bolder because, like I said, I think, when I wake up sometimes at night in the middle of the night, the pain of what I have not done is far greater than the pain or the fear that I feel when I'm thinking about making any of these decisions in the short term, right? And I just hope that this podcast and can help other people structure their lives in a way that they can make bolder decisions. Because, like we said up front, the downside of not making decisions, you can get 30, 40 years down the line in a life and not be able to come back from that, and that is the true loss. So
amen to that.
Good. Well, thank you for coming in today. Thanks for talking with me.
Thanks for having me.
And
awesome.
As is our custom, I will leave you with a quote from that same essay on confidence by Alain de Botton. He says, "Inaction is not in itself cost-free, for in the wings, out of our regular conscious awareness, there is something arguably even more frightening than failure, the tragedy of wasting our lives."